Welcome to The Explainer, where we're uncorking the real story behind the alcohol market. We're going to dig into a fascinating question: why the bottle that sells the most often isn't the one making the most money at all. All right, so let's start with a scenario you've probably been in. You're in the liquor store, looking at that wall of bottles. What's your gut feeling? The one that's flying off the shelf, the best seller? That's got to be the one raking in the most cash, right? Well, you'd think so, but that's where things get really interesting. The data tells this incredible story, a real battle between volume and value. And you know what? The products that seem to be everywhere, the ones that fly off the shelves, they're often totally dwarfed in profitability by their quieter, more expensive neighbors. Okay, so let's get right into it. Secret number one is a big one. It basically blows up the biggest myth in the entire market. This idea that more sales automatically equals more money. It's just not that simple. I mean, just look at the wild difference between wine and whiskey. It's the perfect example. Wine makes up almost 44% of all bottles sold. That's huge, but it only brings in about 23% of the revenue. Now flip that. Look at whiskey. It sells less than half as many bottles, but it snags almost 30% of the entire market's value. That's a massive disconnect. So, if your only metric is how many bottles are getting out the door, yeah, wine is the king. No question. It is the undisputed champion, the absolute engine of the mass market, a total volume-driven behemoth. But here's the twist. The second we start talking about money, the whole picture just flips on its head. That smaller slice for whiskey we just saw, suddenly, it's the biggest piece of the revenue pie. That right there, that's the value-driven side of the market flexing its muscles. So what's the big takeaway here? It's that some products punch way, way above their weight class. And that leads us perfectly into our second secret: the incredible power of going premium. And this whole thing, this dynamic, it's all fueled by a really powerful trend called premiumization. It's basically a fancy word for a huge shift in how we, the consumers, think. We're choosing quality over quantity more and more, and we're willing to pay a lot extra for that better experience. Tequila is just a textbook example of this. Think about it. It makes up only about 5.5% of sales volume, but it generates over 10% of the entire market's value. That is premiumization at work, my friends. That's what it looks like to punch way above your weight. And if you want an even crazier example, look at single malt Scotch whiskey. It's generating a remarkable 10.34% of the market's value from just under 3% of sales. It's the perfect illustration of how a niche, high-margin spirit can be an absolute financial powerhouse. A small player in volume can be a total giant when you count the cash. Okay, so this whole thing can build to a pretty wild extreme. I'm talking about a situation where one single product, just one bottle, can fundamentally warp the entire market. So what if I told you that sometimes these huge market-wide trends, they aren't just a collection of behaviors? What if they're being driven by one single, astonishingly powerful halo product? A true unicorn in the wild. Well, that unicorn has a name. It's Clase Azul Reposado Tequila. And this one bottle, on its own, generates a staggering 4.65% of all the money, not just in tequila, but in the entire alcohol market. Think about that. One single product. And it does all that from just 0.34% of the sales volume, a tiny, tiny fraction of the bottles being sold. I mean, if you're looking for the ultimate example of value over volume, this is it. Game over. So that's pretty mind-blowing, right? But what's really interesting is where all this incredible value is being created, because it's not always where you think, which brings us to secret number 4. You see, the most profitable room in town, it isn't a liquor store. It's a bar. It's a restaurant. This is what the industry folks call the on-premise market. And this channel, it acts like a massive profitability multiplier. Just look at the numbers here. It's responsible for less than 6% of all the bottles sold, but it brings in nearly 15% of the total revenue. That's just wildly disproportionate. And why is that? It's simple, really. It's the experience. A bar or restaurant is where the perceived value of a brand like Clase Azul absolutely explodes. People aren't just buying a drink, they're buying an experience, and they are more than willing to pay a huge premium for it. Okay, so we've got all this money on the table, right? It's being driven by these super high-value premium products. So you have to ask, what's the single biggest threat to all of this growth? And here we are at our final secret. And honestly, it might be the most shocking one of all, because it's not what you'd expect. The biggest threat isn't a rival brand, it's not some new trend, and it's not some genius marketing campaign. Nope, the biggest threat is an empty shelf. It's that simple. It's a fundamental breakdown in basic inventory management, and it is actively throttling the market's potential. Because at the end of the day, success isn't just about making people want your product. You have to actually be there when they want to buy it. You have these widespread stockouts on products people are clamoring for, really popular brands like Jameson and Four Cousins. And all that does is leave guaranteed money sitting on the table. We're talking about a huge chunk of the market. Over 20% of the volume, 12% of the value, just vanishing into thin air. All because the product isn't on the shelf when a customer is ready to pay. So, here's the bottom line. The future of this market doesn't just hinge on creating the next hit brand. It hinges on mastering the simple, absolutely critical task of just being available. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What is the true ceiling for this entire industry if they could just get that one simple thing right?